Welcome to my podcast story, the show where podcasters share the real journey behind their voices, from their first mic check to their biggest milestones. Every episode reveals the lessons, challenges, and breakthrough that shape a podcast star's journey. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and I can't wait for you to hear today's story. In today's episode of my podcast story, we have Cheryl Fisher, the passionate host of Mind Your Midlife, Confidence and Success for Midlife Women. Our podcast serves as a beacon for women navigating the complex terrain of midlife, helping them feel confident in their bodies, decisions, and goals. As a certified life and mindset coach, Sherry brings a wealth of experience from a diverse background in corporate consulting, education, and training to our podcast journey. What makes Sherry's story particularly compelling is how she transitioned from being a good student and employee to discovering her true calling in helping midlife women rewrite their limiting beliefs and embrace new possibilities. She's here to share her inspiring journey of creating a platform that transforms complaints into conversations and helps women find their voice during a period of life that's often misunderstood and underserved. Tell us your name and the name of your podcast.
I'm Cheryl Fisher, and my podcast is Mind Your Midlife.
Oh, wow. My brain, I was hearing mind your business, mind your midlife. Okay, I like that. That's creative. A play off on words, mind your midlife. Okay, before I ask you what the podcast is about, was that a first choice of name, or did you have series of names? You're like, oh yeah, mind your midlife. This is the best.
So it's quite a story, in fact,
Okay.
about the name, because the podcast is 2 years old now, but the name is only
Congratulations.
6 months old. Thank you.
Okay.
So I renamed it 6 months ago completely, and that was a very good thing. But it's funny you should ask that. During the renaming process, I told one of my friends I was in podcast name Purgatory. I was just stuck.
We'll add that to list or glossary of terms in the podcasting world. Call it podcast purgatory. If you've never been there, you won't know what it feels like.
Yes, exactly. But I was changing my mind and doing market research and trying to figure it out and checking, does someone already have the name? And it's quite a process. Yeah,
that's the thing about naming, where you come up with a brilliant name. Coming up with name is not hard. Like, come up with a creative name, like, yeah. And then you realize that, oh, there's a business trademarked, and yeah, you can't use that name. And you're like, okay, so we have to do this all over again. And then you start, and then you're like, okay. And it's taking back to the drawing board again and again and again. Eventually you find something like, okay, no one is taking this. I mean, we'll stick with this.
Yes, it was tough because if there wasn't a podcast, then there was a YouTube channel, or there was a book, or there was, a million different things. Yeah.
Okay. I know that even the name of the podcast kind of tell what the podcast is about, but what is the podcast about?
So the podcast is for midlife women, and it's focused on mindset, as you might have guessed, but the goal being that I want people who are listening to the podcast to learn how to trust themselves, trust their decisions, feel good about themselves, feel good about their midlife bodies and all the stuff we go through. And so it's all going to be based on mindset and what we're telling ourselves inside. But then I also bring on some guests occasionally to talk about health issues or other things that are relevant to midlife as well.
Okay. Yeah. I like that. Mind Your Midlife. That name is, the name is just, what's the word? It's sayable. It's a name that it's just sweet to say. Yeah. Mind Your Midlife. Okay. Earlier on, when you introduced the podcast, you talked about the rebranding, the renaming. I just want you to walk us through a little bit, zoom in a bit of how the process was, and what was the inspiration. What was the name of the podcast before you rebranded, and why did you decide to rebrand? I mean, you had the podcast for 1 year, 6 months. Why rebrand?
Yeah. It's hopefully a helpful story for other people out there. 2 years ago, a little bit more than 2 years ago, I had become a coach, and I had been studying mindset and various related topics for a long time. And I was always thinking, how do I get this out there. I want to tell people what I know because I know it can help them, but how will I do that? I don't know if I want to have a career as a speaker. I don't know if I want to travel that much. And then one day I just realized podcast. Why couldn't I do a podcast? I've listened to them all the time. And so I researched into that, figured it out, and decided I needed a catchy name. And I did research. I was going out to my email list. I was asking, which name do you prefer and all those sorts of things. And I ended up with the name OMG Teach Me. And I liked that name because of the rhyming. And I thought it was kind of cute. And it was a podcast about the things that we don't learn in school that make a huge difference in life, which was still kind of the same thing. So we would talk about mindset or living healthy or, just all things revolving around that. And I loved it. But what I realized is nobody ever knew what I was talking about. No, but not on the episode, but with the name. When I would say it or I would write it down, people would say, is that for teachers? Or is that for students? Or what is that for? Who should listen to it? And so I constantly had to be explaining and explaining and explaining. No, it's for anyone. It's, mindset, healthy living. And the problem also, I think, was that it was for anyone. Well, who's it going to help? You need to be more clear about who's it going to help. You're nodding.
Because we want as much. The thing is, you're like, when you tell podcasters, let your show be for a specific person. Like, no, I mean, why would I settle for a specific person when I can conquer the world? And you say it's for anyone. I'm like, nah. If it's for anyone, it's for no one.
Yeah, if people don't read quickly about it or hear about it and go, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. It's such a quick judgment that we make. We're scrolling through and we see it and we go right by if we don't understand it. That I was seeing my numbers grow gradually. And at the same time, I wanted the podcast to be a major piece of marketing my coaching business. And so the numbers really, I wanted them to grow more. If it's going to be a major piece, it needs to grow more. And so I hired a coach to help me figure that out. And the first thing she said to me is, we need to change the name. And I said, I'll do anything, but I'm not changing the name. And here I am. She convinced me to change the name, and she was right. Absolutely.
Yeah. You're like, no. I mean, you're the expert. When it comes to this area, this little tiny island, that's for me. No, I make the decision here. And then you're like, I mean, it's not really a big deal, right? Mind your midlife. Okay, now that you've rebranded and done the rename, I'm going to ask you the question, which we've talked about a little while. And I want you to answer it as someone who has rebranded and renamed the podcast. What's your podcast? Tell me about your podcast.
My podcast is here to help midlife women feel confident in their decisions, their bodies, and their lives at this point in life that can be a stressful period.
Okay, you've talked about the who. You've talked about what's the mission. What would happen if they listen to your podcast? Sprinkle in the how. How would you do that? Through documentary? Is it through audio books? Is it through all the various podcast formats? Is it through interviews with top elite people? Or how do you do that?
Great question. So some of the episodes are going to have how, as in ways that you can start shifting your mindset on various issues and advice on midlife related physical things for women. And beyond that, what I have launched just recently is a Patreon where people can be a member, and we're going to go deeper into how to do some of the mindset tools I'm recommending, like tapping and affirmations, and create a community there for people who really want to dig in further. And then beyond that, I do individual coaching as well.
Okay. I feel like you understand, but you don't really understand the what I mean when I say how, and I'll explain it. So probably this time you understand better. When I say how, right, it's like there's a show, The Curious there's a history show by a lady. She's a historian, and what she does is she tells history of common day objects, right? She tells the history of the eyeglass, some stuff like that, very everyday objects, but how they've significant. There's one she did on the history of soap. It's a solo it's I won't really call it solo episode. It's a full set production with sound effects and everything, right? And so that's the how, right? You get, then there are other history shows where there are two guys talking about what I think the podcast is called The Rest is History, or History Everywhere or Everything, where two guys are just talking about history and crazy things that happen in history. That's the how. And then there are podcasts where they interview the top elite people in terms of sports, economics, all the best in the world, and they talk to them and see how they do things. And one of such podcasts is what they call it, the Tim Ferriss Show.
So I am a mix. My podcast is a mix of solo episodes where I am sitting and talking with whoever's listening and explaining a concept related to midlife or mindset.
Okay.
And I do interview quite a few people because I'm always looking for experts on maybe a career change or planning for retirement or healthy living in your 50s, things that I'm not the expert on. So it is a mix of both.
Okay. Let's go back a bit. What was the inspiration that led to you starting the podcast 2 years ago?
It was really wanting... Well, I'm going to give you an answer, and I think there's really two answers. The answer I normally give everyone is true, and it was really wanting to share everything that I had learned about just the junk in our heads most of the time and how that affects us, because it's such a big deal. And I was realizing one little conversation here and there isn't going to do it. I want to share this with people in some way. And I used to be a teacher at one point. I love to talk. I've been a trainer, talking, no problem. So it was, I want to share, and I can definitely talk. But then I think probably the second reason that I don't often say is I was starting out as a coach, and I was trying to figure out, how am I going to market this business? Because marketing is not my strength. And so it became a tool for that as well.
Yeah. What were the expectations you had for the podcast when you were starting out?
You know, that's a good question. I'm thinking back. I wanted it to grow. I wanted it to bring in new clients. I don't know if I ever created goals that were concrete enough. And maybe in hindsight, that was part of the problem, because when I rebranded, I have very specific goals about I want to be in the top 100 in my category, and I want to be bringing in clients, and, you know, I have numbers now. And before it was very grow, and that may have been part of the issue.
You know, sometimes I feel that, and this will be controversial, I feel that people don't want to commit to a number or a goal, right? Because they feel that, oh, if I don't reach the number, I might be disappointed and stuff like that. And the idea is that we just have to we want to have something to work towards. Well, if you're vogue, you're like, okay, you don't even know, how do we know if we're making progress or not?
Exactly. That is, I mean, I learned from doing that and making my own mistake. And if I were coaching, the irony is we all need our own coaching. But if I were coaching someone, I would be telling them, you got to make the decision now as to what you're going towards, because the act of deciding is going to give you the path forward. But I made that mistake myself.
Yeah. That's when you mentioned decision, it just took me back to you rebranding. You see, one of the luxury most small podcasters have is the fact that they're small, so nobody really knows much about them, just a couple of persons, which means that they can afford to rebrand and change the name, and there will be really no really big cost of rebranding compared to if you're a big company and then you rebrand, the cost is really big, or a big podcast. And so sometimes when small podcasts are overthinking the name of a podcast, I'm like, just do it. Like, it's no big deal. If you find out it's not a good fit, you change it back to the other one. You move on. You're just a small podcaster. Nobody really knows about you. Nothing's going to happen.
The goal is not to be just a small podcast, but yes, it's true. I had to make a new website. I had to change links. I had to change all that kind of stuff. And it was a bit of work to do that, but that's all doable. It's
Quick break. Before we continue, I'd love to invite you to join the My Podcast Story newsletter. Each week, I share highlights from our guest stories, behind the scenes podcasting tips, and resources to help you grow your own show. You can sign up at mypodcaststory.com/join. That is mypodcaststory.com/join. Now, let's get back to the episode.
not that big of a deal.
I feel like the rebranding is not the issue. It's more like people who are about to start their podcast, they're thinking of what would be the best name to start the podcast. That was where I would tell them, just start. Eventually, when you find out what the best name is, you can then rebrand. Because now you're like, oh, this is the best name, and I'm going to run with this.
Yes. I fully agree with just start. And I think that's basically what I did. I did do some learning and some research before I started. What in the world is this whole thing? What am I doing? But then I just kind of went, hey, let's try it. And I learned a ton. So I'm thankful I did that. I could be sitting here and not have had any of those experiences. So yeah, just start.
Yeah. What's the okay? So many interesting things to talk about for the podcast. The podcast is 2 years, 2 years old, and that's significant growth. You're among the top percent. I don't know what the number is, but you're up there, because podcasting is not easy, and to stick with it for 2 years, that's a lot. You're thought leader in the space. Earlier on, you mentioned that you want to be the top 100 in your category. What's your category?
It's how to. Under education.
How to under education. I do have a podcast in that category.
Do you? We're competitors now.
No. I feel like the how to and education category, it's not specific. It's not like, okay, I'll give an example. If you had a podcast on psychology, you would have, let's say, psychology category. It's clear. If you have a podcast on history, you'll be history category. But a podcast on education, on how to, there are so many podcasts that fall into that category. There are business podcasts there, there are entrepreneurship podcasts there, so many other stuff. So
there's
it doesn't
language learning, there's
language
everything.
learning, there's relationship, all those things. And so would there be a different podcast category other than the how to? If I see that category, I know what to expect from the podcast, for your podcast.
So this is an interesting discussion to have, because I was originally in the self-improvement category under education. Okay. And I still have that as my secondary. So I guess some apps catch the secondary category as well. But self-improvement is one of the biggest and most competitive categories in podcast apps. And so the advice I got was to look around and see if there were any other categories that still felt like a fit, but wouldn't just swallow me up with hundreds of others necessarily. And that's how I came upon how to. And it still fits. And I'm happy that I made that switch, but it's probably something where some people would go one way and some people would go the other with something like that.
Yeah, that's true. It just occurred to me that most of the times, these categories on the podcast apps, they don't really do enough justice for a podcast. And if you created your own category, right, that's clearly not this one we're trying to like say, oh, where do we fit in that? We're like, oh, we're in education, we're trying to press us. Yeah, because if we could create our own category for our own podcast, what category would your podcast be, such that people will see, they're like, that's what's this.
Yeah, I have a few ideas in mind. I probably would have to think about it, but I'll throw out what comes to mind. It could be something like women's health. Okay. It could be empowering women. It would definitely be something related to women if there were such a category.
Okay. Hold that thought. And that would be because for me, when I think of creating a category, what I'm thinking of is, if someone was to do a random post where they are recommending the top podcast in this, where would your podcast fall into, right? So it could be the top podcast for women to listen to, right? Yeah, that's one. And then it could also be the top, like what kind of list would we fall into? The top podcast to listen to. Your podcast has nothing to do with ASMR. So yeah. it doesn't fall into that list, right? So things like that. What I top podcast for self-improvement, it falls into there. For education, for other specific things, for a top podcast for midlife women.
Yes.
It falls there. So these are categories of podcasts that it's not just anybody.
Yeah.
It's midlife women.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not just any woman, it's midlife women.
Yes.
Right. So before we were like, oh, this is for all women, like some ladies in their 20s.
No.
You get
Yeah, I have a daughter in her 20s. She listens a little bit, but it's not really relevant. Yeah. Yeah.
Just to support my mom. It's like she's okay, yeah. Because the thing is this: when you say my podcast is for women, it's quite different from no. You think about it. When you say my podcast is for women, and someone else comes out and say my podcast is for midlife women.
Yeah.
And then you happen to be a midlife woman, and you're like, yeah, that's a podcast for me. Because
Yeah.
now this is what whenever people are shut out of something, it brings this inclusion, and for something for people to be included, certain things have to be excluded. It just makes sense, right? Like, so no, it's not for every woman. It's for women that have this, that have this, that have this. And I say, that's me. So you made a podcast for me.
Exactly. And that was such an important lesson for me to learn, because really, if I were 32 and I saw this podcast, I might think, oh, that might be for women older than me, but I could still listen if I wanted. It's not like I'm saying you cannot listen.
Yeah.
So they get to choose, right? But it's clear, and that's really important. Yeah.
Yeah. It's clear, and that's really, really important. Okay. So we've talked about the category of the podcast and all that. What is the growth, like the audience size of the podcast like right now?
So interestingly, it varies pretty widely. I'm trying to think, if I put together the month, I would say we're around 1,000 to 1,200 downloads a month.
Wow, that's a lot.
I'm happy about that. Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
1,000 to 1,200 midlife women listen to you talk every month.
Right.
Wow.
Right. So that's 4 or 5 episodes. I would love to have that number for every episode. That's the next goal.
Yeah.
But I'm happy so far.
Yeah. Okay. I'm curious, right? Because a lot of persons are still struggling with 0 downloads. What? And some persons will say, well, I don't get 0 downloads a month. I get 10 or maybe 5. And you and I know that 5 downloads is you trying to watch or listen to your podcast on Spotify and Apple. So let's just not go there. Okay. So people are still struggling with 0 downloads. But what would you say is the major thing you use to grow your podcast to from 0 to get into 1,000 and 1,200 downloads a month?
Gosh, it's such a combination of things. Let me give you a couple of answers, and maybe I'll realize what would be the biggest. I have done some advertising.
Okay.
And I won't continue to do that forever, but as I was relaunching, I decided it was worth it. And so I've done some social media marketing as well as Mopod advertising to get some momentum going. And so that definitely made a difference. And then, so that maybe that's the biggest thing at the moment. But the other thing really is people know what it is now. And I can see it getting shared more. I can see the people, sharing in their story and tagging me and telling people about it and that sort of thing. And that wasn't necessarily happening before. So there's some momentum there too. Yeah.
You said you did Mopod ads campaign. What was the downloads like before the ad campaign, and what you've told us what it is now, so we can really see if the change was really worth it.
It was a pretty significant change, and it's still, depending on the week, it goes up and down, but I would say it was around somewhere between 100 and 200 downloads an episode before, and now it's up towards 300 and 400.
So that's about 500, 400, 500 downloads in a month. Down to 1,000, 1,200. And how much have you spent so far on ads?
Not really that much, an average of 200 to 300 a month, which in my opinion is not that much.
How many months? So we can see how
Okay.
many months. Yeah.
Let me think. 3 months.
Oh, 3 months. 200 to 300 per month. So that's about 900. Wow. Wow. Wow.
So I think for some people that is probably a small budget considering what I know some people do. And then for other people, it's a ridiculously high budget. But I kind of made the decision like now I'm changing the name. We're doing a relaunch. I'm going to throw all the things at it. And I'm happy about that.
Yeah, it is working, right? You've doubled the listener. I think tripled the listeners number. And the thing about podcaster is that now that you've had the message and the vision and everything clear, the listeners you're attracting, they get to stay. So next episode, even if you don't run ads for it, you still get that's around that amount of numbers.
And
Yeah.
that's what I'll be watching. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Because we don't want a situation where, like, the moment we stop spending money on ads, and then we're like, phew,
Yeah,
back
exactly.
back to where we were. Yeah,
Exactly.
that won't be nice.
Yeah. So I'll be
Yeah.
watching that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Mopo, they have a campaign where you can run ads to get followers on Spotify and Apple, and instead of just downloads. I think that's because now if you have followers, it means they kind of like subscribe to you. So every time you release an episode, they see your episode
Right.
rather than just them listening to it. I don't
Right.
know what was the campaign you did with Mopod?
It was, gosh, I'm not going to remember the right terminology without it in front of me. It was a self-serve ad. I don't have the details in front of me.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I think just to like make it easier, maybe you might remember, maybe you might not. What was the whole essence of the campaign? Was it to get more downloads or to get followers?
It was more for downloads. So
Okay,
it might not have
yeah.
been as beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, because I know downloads is way cheaper than followers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's way cheaper. It's way cheaper. Yeah. Okay. Wow, that's nice to know. $900. That's a lot. But I mean, now that I say $900 now, it might seem like, oh, you spent it all in one. It's not. It's actually $200 to $300. So let's get
Yeah.
that straight. $200,
Yeah.
$300 in a month, right? So which is
Yeah.
not really a big deal, right? And
Yeah.
considering that now you've
Exactly.
gotten the podcast, so I think it's just like fast tracking the momentum. So instead of waiting
Exactly.
6-8 months, you're like, oh, let's just get 1,000 people, 2,000 people. Now we have a number of persons to share our podcast, talk about it on social media, and so we have this base to grow on rather than just starting from 10,
Yes.
the next week 15, the next week 20, the next week 30.
Yes. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. I was doing
Yeah.
that for a year and a half where I would say, I mean, gosh, we would swing from 40 downloads a week to 100. And every now and then there would be one that was higher than that. And it would inch up a little bit. And I think if we kept at it, any podcast that's a good podcast would keep inching up and gradually grow. I wanted to boost it a little bit as I was doing all of this.
Yeah. Very, very, very. Yeah. Okay, it's working out. So there's really no. But if it did not work out, you would have learned, that this doesn't work out, and then you would have moved on. But it's working out, and if you have the money, just double down on it. Because a lot of persons, the thing here is this: a lot of persons are actually spending that money, but they're not aware of it because it's not actually money. I'll give an example. People spend so much time on social media, right? Now, if you were to say, okay, let's calculate your hourly rates. Right. And when we do that on that social media, because they want to grow their show, right? So they're doing this, and so maybe in a week they spend maybe let's say 20 hours. A lot of persons they do that, like they're growing the show and all that.
Easy.
So if you were to pay someone to do that work for you, you realize that $200-$300 is really not a big deal.
This is exactly my thought process. I do the podcast on my own at this point. I decided I wanted to put my budget towards growing it. I'll do the editing and that sort of stuff for now.
Yeah.
And so it's just moving it to a different place.
Okay. Yeah. It's nice to have an audience. Like it changes the game to have people that they're listening to the podcast. And I think but why I would not recommend it for beginners that are just starting the podcast? Most of the time, you don't even know what you're doing.
Correct.
You just blabbing and talking to the microphone. and so if you spend money on the podcast, what will happen is that you get this 400 downloads, 500 downloads, and when you stop running the ads, you realize you're like, woo,
Yeah.
back to 10. Like, what happened? What's going on?
Yeah.
You're like,
I agree with you on that. Yeah. Make sure you feel good about what you're doing before you put further investment. Yeah.
yeah, you should use the first sets of episodes to figure out your message, figure out how to tell the message, and figure out the delivery and all that. And once you've figured that out and say, okay, yeah, it's all clean, everything is aligned, and I feel this is really valuable with someone, then you start with 50, 100, and then you say, oh, did it work? And then you say, oh, spend more money on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And podcasts are tricky things because I'm not yet convinced. I'm curious what you think about this. I'm not yet convinced that social media is really that good of a way to grow a podcast.
No. Yeah. Social
Right?
media is for growing your brand. It's like, oh, I just want people to
Yes.
know about me, so let me just post the podcast and all that, right? Because this is it. When you're posting on social media, you're trying to convince me to listen to podcast,
Yep.
and I don't listen to podcasts. I see your stuff and it's nice. So I'm like, yeah, she's doing great stuff. I like it.
Right.
I move
Right.
on. Right?
Right.
So the best way to grow podcast is to talk to people that already listen to podcasts. Because now the only convincing you're trying to do is listen to my podcast, not try and listen to a podcast, which is like too distant. Because for me to listen to a podcast, I have to first say, okay, podcasting is something I want to listen to. And then when I start listening, I'm like, okay, let me listen to yours. It's like this show now, if someone is listening to this podcast, which they're like, oh yeah, I'm a midlife woman. I love to check out our podcast.
Mhm.
They go check out the podcast, right? So there's no convincing like, oh,
Right.
it's hard. And so that's where things like guesting on other people's podcasts come in. And then I think the one I'm trying to like scale and really explore, because there's only how many podcasts you can guest on in a month. So there's a limited time.
True.
Is there is a podcast promo. Yeah, where I'll give an example. Let's say we could swap a podcast promo where I give you a copy to read about my own podcast. You're like, there's a podcast called My Purgatory. It's an amazing podcast for podcasters, hosts, blah blah blah. We'll figure out the copy parts, and then you should go check it out. Right? And then on my own podcast, I read a copy of your podcast. I'm like, there is a podcast called Mind Your Midlife. It's a fantastic podcast. It's for if you stuff like that. And the thing is, it depends on the type you want. It could be host read. It could be the one with jingles and all those things were produced, maybe 15, 20 seconds. And then you reach out to various other podcasters. You could pay them, a little sponsorships, right? It doesn't have to be, how do I explain this now? There are a lot of small podcasters, right? They get about, let's say, 50 to 100 listens, right? The thing about podcasting is that despite the audience, the depth is there, right? So if you get to 50 to 100 listens a month or per episode, those persons are actually invested in you. So you might not be like getting millions or stuff like that, but these people, they actually care about you. And so you could actually sponsor them that, oh yeah, I'll pay you, just maybe $20 or so, I don't know, and you read the ad, and yeah, you spend that budget and see how it works. Right? In that scenario, I would want to, these are some crazy ideas I have. I should test run them so that I know that, oh, this is what works.
Yeah, I actually was talking to someone about mentioning each other's podcasts like that last fall. And then I went into the whole change and I said, let's talk about it again. But now I'm remembering we never talked about it again. So yeah, it's a good idea, I think.
It does work, right? Especially when your messaging is clear and all that. Because now I'm listening to the podcast and I hear, oh, midlife stuff. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like something I'm interested in. And it's just a click. I just go and I search for the podcast, right? I'm already listening to podcast. I'm in that game already, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you're someone who reads books and in the end, at the end of the book, they say, oh, you can read more about this book. I'm like, yeah, I like this book. This author knows what he's talking about. I should check out this other one, right? Or rather than you trying to convince someone that doesn't read the book that, oh, this book is fantastic. I just wrote it. Yeah. And like, what you're doing is great. Nice one. I love that you're an author, but nah, books are not for me. No, I'm not interested.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. That is what people told me about social media, and also what I've seen for sure is you're, as you said, dragging someone off to another medium. Whereas if they're already listening, they're already a podcast listener, it's a little easier to switch. Or not switch, but add.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is easier to switch or add or whatever the case might be. Yeah, that is. And there are a lot of ways, right? We talked about cross promo, we talked about podcast promo, and then there are even what do you call it now, podcast ads, where instead of running ads on Facebook or TikTok, you could actually run ads on podcast listening apps, right? There are some so it shows as banner ads, and it's like there people can just click on it and listen to your show. Yeah, that works. Yeah. I
I
don't know how
have thought
Mopod does
about
their ad, but I think
I've
that's what they
thought
do.
about that.
Yeah, yeah. That I really need to, because now I think I've gotten the consistency part of the podcast dialed in. I need to start working on the growth aspect.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're all in the same boat, right? We have to do
Are
both
we?
those things.
Are we? Are we? Ah, okay, it's all right. Like, are we the same boat? Like, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Some of us we're thinking of crazy ideas, not because we don't know what to do, but because we're like, nah, I need funds, in order to run this promo, this ad, and this campaign. No, how do I do it for free?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I don't want to be spending money on that marketing forever either. So I get that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing, yeah, that's true. I've been thinking of crazy things. Honestly, so many crazy, so many crazy things. And I don't know if you know podcast newsletters.
Yes. That is a good point. That is an
Yeah,
area I've looked into a little, but not much. Have you?
I have looked at it. I've been keeping an eye for the platforms. And when I talk about podcast newsletters, I'm talking about newsletters that recommend podcast.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Like
So
Pod
I've been,
News.
yeah, but they have a special website where if you submit your podcast, they'll put in, I think it's free. Yeah, it is free. I've forgotten the name of the special website, but it's well designed. They'll put your podcast there. And then there's other ones like podcast delivery and all that. And the goal is for me is, um, if people are looking for my kind of podcast, how would they go about looking for it? They don't know who I am. They don't know my name. They've never met me in their entire life. But they're like, oh, I'm looking for a podcast for midlife women. How would they find it? And try and be there when they're searching for you. And you get them to listen to the podcast.
Yep. I agree. And thank you for that reminder, because I think that probably is a good way to go about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we've talked about some marketing. If I do find something that works, I'll be sure to let you know.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah, and probably maybe sooner or later I might message you and say, yeah, that podcast promo idea I talk about, we should try it. This is my audio version. You can just play it on the podcast, and then you're like, yeah, send me yours.
Yeah. Hey, you never know. Gotta try. You gotta try. So I definitely think in general, we talk ourselves out of things too often. So if there's a reasonable idea that might move something forward in life, and it's not dangerous and there's not too much risk, we may as well try. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I know that I have that leverage, right, to try it. I'll explain. When I explain that, you understand it in a bit. And that is, I've spoken to over 100 podcast hosts.
Yeah.
Emphasis on the word podcast host. And so when it's time for me to promote and do podcast promo, once I get the message dialed in and the thing and everything, I just send them a message and say, hi, thank you for being an amazing guest on the podcast. I'd love to do a podcast swap with you. Now, first of all, they know me, so it's not stranger danger. We've spoken for like 1 hour, and they're podcast hosts. And they want to grow their podcast. And they're like, yeah, sure, I'd love to do that. And some will say no, which there's nothing wrong with that. And like, yeah, but out of 100, I'm pretty sure I might be able to get 50 to say yes.
Yeah. I mean, 100 is a good base to work from and then start asking. I agree.
Yeah. I think ultimately it's about collaboration. We should start asking, how can I? Because at the end of the day, all social media, all platform, all everything is about borrowing other people's audience.
Yeah.
Because if you think of it this way, if you're on TikTok, you don't actually own the audience. TikTok owns the audience. And so when your video goes viral or gets views, it's not your audience. It's TikTok like, yeah, let's put this video in front of some of our people and let them see it. And like, yeah, and like you get views. Same thing with YouTube, Google, same thing with podcasts, right? So once you understand that, there's actually the only way you actually get your own audience is when you try to bring people that are not on the internet to come visit your site That would be when you are getting older. But if you realize that it's about borrowing other people's audience, you start asking yourself, okay, whose audience can I borrow? And you're like, okay, yeah, this podcast. Because all platforms, Google, you don't own the people that are on Google. They are going to Google to search on Google. And so Google just say, let's put the website there. Or YouTube. Same thing with a podcast, right? So if you're on my podcast, and hopefully some of my listeners, they go check out your podcast, right? So you're borrowing my audience, right? And then I might, okay, I don't think I'm a good fit to be a guest on your podcast.
Probably not, but I mean that in no offense to you at all.
No, I understand. You see, that's the thing about having a specific show, because it means that people can easily filter themselves to say, am I a good guest for the show or am I not? Because now you're like, oh my God, teach me. I'm like, okay, yeah, I have something to teach teach the listeners of the podcast. But when I see the show that this is this show, I'm like, nah. I don't really think I can. I don't see how I can, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like understanding the mission so that we can easily tell, okay, this yes, this no, because if not, making decisions will be hard.
Yeah. And I would say that about your podcast as well. When you call it My Podcast Story, I know exactly what it's going to be. It's the same thing, people are going to listen if they're curious about how people's experience with podcasting has been. And that's what you want them to listen for, I assume.
Yeah. And it's easy to, and the thing is, it's easy to get yes when it's specific. Because now instead of reaching out to everybody, say, I have this podcast where I have to talk about this. I'm like, no. I'm like, hi, I noticed you're a podcast host. I'd love for you to come on my podcast and share your podcast story. And now it's a question of, because I know, because the thing is well fitted and everything, they are a good guest for my podcast. So it's just a question of, if they want to be on my podcast or not. So it's not, because it's perfectly aligned.
Yes. So much easier. Agree.
Yeah,
fully.
It makes a lot of things easier.
Yes.
Okay.
And we also can predict when we're making decisions about what should our episodes be about. We kind of know what our listeners are looking for because we know why they're here.
Yeah. It makes a lot of things easy. I mean, the first phase, that's the thing about showing up a podcast. The first phase, right? The first 6 months, depending on how frequent you podcast, it should be about you just opening your mouth and talking out loud. And then eventually you're like, oh no, this is how I should talk. I shouldn't be shouting. I should be saying like, this is my voice, right? And most persons, they're trying in that first 6 months, they're trying to talk, to learn how to talk. That's the first time they're doing a podcast or creating content online. They're learning to grow the show. They're learning to be consistent. And I'm like, ooh, that's a lot of cap to wear.
It is, absolutely, especially if we're doing all of our own editing and marketing and all of those pieces
and all that. Yeah, it is, and it can get pretty overwhelming because now you're not seeing the results because there's so many things. But it's easier when you're like, okay, this is what I'm dialing in, right? Now you've gotten the message part clear. You're like, okay, I'm going to work on growth. And for me, working on growth for me, it's a question of let me find out what works for me. And the moment I see that thing, the moment I just see it, boom, cut every other thing out and double down on this. And
And I would say, to be fair, I'm still in an experimental mode with growth because, as I was saying, we'll see what happens with the advertising I've done. We'll see does it keep continuing in the same way? And then I'm going to try something new as well. So, and of course, I'm talking on your podcast. I'm going on other podcasts. We met through Podmatch. So that's what everybody's there for. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. That is. Yeah, okay. If you do find anything that works, let me know and I'll be glad to. Usually the cheaper and more affordable options. Free. Yeah. No, the podcast guesting works, but it's just that it takes. I won't really say it takes time per se, but because if you're guesting on podcast, you literally not, you're just showing up and having an amazing time, having a conversation, doing what you know how to do best. And after this episode, I'm going to go ahead and handle the logistics and everything. And you're like, once the episode goes live, I'm like, the episode is live. Here's a link. You can go check it out. Right? But for me, it's like, for every 1 hour of episodes, I'm spending another extra 2 to 3 hours. That's about 4 hours for each hour of episode. So you just spend it, depending on the type of podcast, but you spend 1 hour. So sometimes if it's a subject expert, because you're already good in it, you might spend 45 minutes to prepare. And then usually most of the times it's the same topic podcast guest on different podcasts. but it's just a question of adapting for a different audience.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, it is that usually this podcast is a little bit different because I'm talking about my podcast story, but usually I'm talking about some specific aspect of mindset for women on whatever podcast I'm on. And it's definitely easier to be a guest for sure.
Yeah.
But that being said, I love being a host too.
Yeah. If there was a way to just get someone to handle the editing, that would be nice. That would
There
be
is
nice.
a way. You just have to
I'm-
be willing to pay for it.
I'm broke. When the podcast starts making money, that won't be a problem, of course. Because now I'm like, okay, I just show up and I do what I know how to do best. And after which the editor takes over the episode and they do what they do and they do it best and it goes live. But I don't have that luxury. And so everything, I'm the producer. If everything goes wrong right now, I start wondering, okay, what do I touch?
Yeah, no, I get it. That's what I've chosen to do now as well, and spend any budget I have differently. And, maybe it'll change, but I kind of like being in charge of the whole process, even though it's time consuming, as you said. My episodes are about a half an hour, give or take, each week, once a week. So that does take exactly what you said, 45 minutes to an hour to prepare. And then it takes probably 2 or 3 times the length of the episode to edit. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I want us to talk about something very interesting. We talked about showing up, rebranding. We talked about the growth of the podcast, and I'd love to just putting it out there so you can have it in mind. I'd love to do a chapter 2 of this story, right, in the future, and see, okay, how's the heart going? What happened? Did I, to follow up and do a series on the story. What we've not talked about is, does the podcast make money?
So right now, directly, no, but it does bring in clients occasionally for my coaching business. So the goal is that grows, that the podcast becomes the biggest funnel for coaching clients.
Yeah. Why is that when I always ask the question if podcasts make money? People always, what they first think of is, do I have ads on my podcast? Is my podcast being sponsored? Like, as long as the podcast feeds whatever platform that makes money for you, then the podcast makes money.
Yeah. And I will think about sponsors and ads for sure. I didn't want to do it right away. Sometimes you have to be a certain number of downloads per episode and all that anyway, which I don't think I'm at yet. But I want this as a marketing arm of my business, so I'm okay with that being the focus.
Yeah. One of the things I've been exploring, and I feel like nobody really talks about, everybody's like, oh, your podcast can help you get clients, which is nice, which is great. Like, that's fantastic. I love to have a podcast help me get more clients and make more money. But the thing nobody really talks about is how you can use your podcast to build your personal brand as a host, to establish yourself as a thought leader.
Yes, good point.
Yeah, because if people see you as an authority, it makes the sales call, there's really no need for a sales call. Yeah. Because they're already sold when they're like, oh yeah, where do I put my card so I can buy? And you're like, oh no, I need to convince you about the program. And they're like, what do you want to tell me that I don't already know? Give me the card, let me pay. Like, no, are you sure? I say, my friend, you're wasting my time. You're like, oh, I've listened to her. I know you can solve my problem. And like, why are you that confident? I'm like, yeah, I already know, right? And podcasting, and I like the fact that video, AI, and all those things still there. They can really make it easier for us to really create content, a lot of it. Yeah. And put it out there and be everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. I really love that you just said that, because the easiest way for me to say it is I want my podcast to be the marketing funnel to bring in clients. But of course, I want it to be a way that I establish myself as someone that people would want to work with. So I appreciate you kind of reminding me that that's part of that. Yeah.
It's strange because why you said that, I just remembered the meaning of branding. That branding is association, right? And if branding is association, you see that's what they do when they do pay all these celebrities and athletes to advertise all these products, because these people are like celebs. Everybody know them, they like them and trust them. And so when they're like, "Oh, I'm a celeb. You should buy this mic. It's incredible." And I'm like, yeah, that's the mic. I don't want to mention any celebrity's name, but that's the mic Wisdom use. Hopefully, someone
Yeah.
celeb. And like, yeah, I should buy that mic. And guess what? Because some of my goodwill and trust and everything flows into this products. And same thing with branding, right? People know me. And so when they see me talking to you and we're having a conversation, we're not fighting. They're like, yeah, yeah, that lady, yeah, she was on Wisdom's podcast. She knows her stuff. And same thing if I was to, which I don't think I'll be going to your podcast anytime soon. But if I was to be on your podcast, like, yeah, that guy, Wisdom. Yeah, that
Right.
guy, it looks like someone, some of your goodwill and all that will rub off on me. And
Yes.
people are like, yeah, I try, I feel, so it's association. And same
Yes.
thing with podcast guesting and hosting other people is that
Yes.
the guests we host on our podcast, their goodwill rubs off on us. Like, yeah, I've had you, so we can say, oh, I've had so and so and so and so on my podcast, and people who are in that industry, they will know. It's just like, oh, I've had Tony Robbins, I've had Tim Ferriss, I've had James Clear, all these guys on my podcast, and I'm just saying hypothetically, they're not on my podcast actually. And like, yeah, like for you to have had all these guys on your podcast, I mean, they don't know who I am, but they're like, I mean, the guy, he should know his stuff. I mean, even though I'm just a regular guy who knows nothing, doesn't even know what he's talking about. So it rubs off. And that's like one thing that nobody really talks about, because everybody's like, how do I get more downloads? But I'm like, how do I explain this now? In terms of thought leadership, it's like two ways. There's up and there's down, right? So the question is, if I say I'm a sales expert, right? And let's say in the US, I'm a sales expert in the US. Do all the names, the people that matter in sales in the industry of US, do they know me?
Right.
And the best way for them to know me is to have them come on my podcast and we have a conversation and be strategic about it. And so I have this, and almost all the people you want to mention as, oh, these are the sales guys or the sales ladies in the industry. I'm like, I've spoken to her on my podcast.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, I check episode so number. Like, yeah, so you've spoken to everybody. And guess what? Before you know, when you mention my name in cycles of this person, it's like, yeah, I know that guy. I was on this podcast. Great guy, great energy and stuff like that.
Yes.
And yeah, and then hopefully we'll get the listeners. But
yes.
Yeah,
you are absolutely right. I'm thinking of people who I've been on their podcasts or people who've been on my podcast. And then I've said to someone else, oh, yes, we had a great conversation and you should contact her or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's one of those things I'm really, really excited about having a podcast, because now I'm like, when I reach out to people and, okay, I give an example. For Podmatch, it might not really be a big deal, right? Because most of the people who are on Podmatch, they're actually podcast guests, and some of them, they have offers and they have something, quote unquote, call to action, which there's nothing wrong with, right? They want to promote, they want to talk about, and yeah. But the thing is, after I was on Podmatch and I got some guests to say yes to me, it kind of boosts my my confidence. I was like, yeah, people can say yes to me. Let me go try out somewhere. So I had a different podcast, right? In a different niche. That one is not on Podmatch, right? And so I went out and I reached out to different people that were in the feed. And some of them, they've never been on the podcast before. And it's like, I was like, super excited that you invited me to be on your podcast. Who am I for you to invite me? And I was like, in my mind, I didn't say it out loud. I was like, I am the one that is being honored for you to be on my podcast. But I was like, well, it seems like, and it was not just one person, it was 3 or 4 of them, they said the same thing. I was like, is this my podcast or is this another podcast? And it's like, podcast is such a big thing to be featured on. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. And I was like, how would I have spoken to them if I didn't have a podcast? I was like, I want to talk to you for 30 minutes, stranger danger.
You know what? I love that you're saying this. And I want to say, related to that, I've had so many people say to me over the past 2 years, you have a podcast? Really? Wow. Like, they're so amazed. How could you do that? Wow. And so anybody who's thinking of starting a podcast and is listening to this should know it might seem daunting, but it's not. And it's pretty cool how people look at you and think, wow, you actually did that thing that you were wanting to do. It's funny, the perspective difference.
Yeah. go be a thought leader, control the narrative. Wow, I just looked at the time now. It occurred to me that, wow, we've gone over time.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? When did that happen? I
don't
still
know
have
when
a
that
lot of
happened
questions
either.
to ask. Wow, it's all right. We definitely have to do a chapter 2, please, Cherry.
Sure.
Whatever happens, you
Yeah.
do a rebrand. Hopefully not, but
No more. No more.
well, you never could tell. You're like, no, I don't want to do over midlife. I want to do this. Like, things change. The constant variable is you, and as long as you're in the
Yeah.
podcast, we're good, and people will always listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
So I'd love to do a chapter 2, and I might reach out maybe 3 months, 4 months from now. But if something exciting that happens that you love to share, that doesn't have to wait for 2-3 months, you can reach out to me, and we'll book a time.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can my once again, I'd love for you to mention the name of the podcast again, and
Yes.
where can people find the podcast? If you have a website, that would be nice.
Yep. Yes. So it's Mind Your Midlife podcast. It is on all the podcast apps, and maybe the easiest way is to go to the website mindyourmidlifepodcast.com. Made it easy.
Was the Mind Your Midlife taken?
Oh, yes, it was. It was.
Who would do that?
I don't know, but I didn't go into it and try to get it back. So yes, mindyourmidlifepodcast.com.
Yeah.
It's not in use as far as I can tell, but it was taken.
Yeah, that's the thing. I've been there. You see it, nobody uses it, and they ask you to pay $80,000, sometimes $20,000, and I'm like, if I had $20,000, I probably wouldn't be doing this. Okay, yeah. So you can find the podcast at mindyourmidlifepodcast.com.
Yes. Perfect.
Yeah. Well, once again, thank you so much, Sherry. It's one of these conversations that always make me want to be a podcaster. I'm like, yeah, I get to meet amazing people, and we chat, even though we've never known each other for like never.
Yes.
And here we are chatting as though we've been friends all along.
Yes, time flew. Thank you, Wisdom, for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. That's it for today's episode of my podcast story. I hope you enjoyed listening to this journey as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. If you found value in today's episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps others discover the show. And don't forget to join the newsletter at mypodcaststory.com/join for more stories and podcasting insights. Until next time, keep telling your story because someone out there needs to hear it.